I'm doing this again. Let's just... okay, fudge it. Let's just carry it. Let's just do it.
"8:07 a.m., 21st of November, 1916. His Majesty's hospital ship Britannic is sailing to the British sea base of Lemnos in the Aegean Sea, where she would take on board thousands of wounded soldiers from the Allied campaigns against Turkey in the First World War. She sails from Naples, Italy, on a scheduled round trip of 2 weeks from Southampton. Britannic is the third and final ship of the Olympic class, the youngest sister of the RMS Olympic and the infamous RMS Titanic.
Britannic was originally designed to be fairly similar to her sisters Olympic and Titanic. Increased competition amongst transatlantic liners and greater expectations from passengers led designers to make significant changes to her accommodations. This would set Britannic's design apart from her two older sisters. Third class was given new entrances. Second class would be given the luxury of their very own gymnasium. First class passengers would enjoy many new improvements. These included a larger a la carte restaurant, a new reception room and B-deck, where the most elite passengers would dine in unparalleled style. A playroom where children could play instead of using one of the palm courts like on Olympic and Titanic. A ladies' hairdresser salon, in addition to the barber shop. New sitting rooms were added on sea deck as a result of the parlour suites having proved so popular on Olympic and Titanic. Keeping up with the trends and expectations, first class would see the addition of many private bathrooms and washrooms for cabins. Although basic on Olympic and Titanic, the swimming pool in Britannic was to be completely redecorated to keep up with the trends of sumptuous swimming baths aboard the German liners. Even the already luxurious spaces such as the Grand Staircase were also improved. The boat and A-deck entrances were modified to accommodate a Welt pipe organ. Ultimately, this musical instrument was never installed, but it still survives today. The decorative wrought iron panels designed to conceal the pipes on the organ were eventually auctioned off in London after the war. Many of Britannic's luxurious fittings were never installed due to her conversion to a hospital ship in 1950. These were sold off over 3 separate auctions in London and Belfast in 1919.
When the First World War broke out, construction of Britannic was placed on the back burner. Harland and Wolff, the builders, shifted their work toward the war effort. The Allied invasion of Gallipoli showed that the British Admiralty would need larger ships to transport their wounded home from the far-off battlefields of the Mediterranean. The Cunard ocean liners, Mauretania and Aquitania, were requisitioned as troop ships. This was also done with the White Star liner Olympic, the first sister of Britannic. Finally, the War Office decided to pay for the finalization of White Star's Britannic under the condition that it would be used as a hospital ship for the duration of the war. After the war ends, the ship would be scheduled to return to the hands of the White Star Line.
Over 3,300 bunks were installed on Britannic to accommodate patients. The ship was painted white, with a green band broken by red crosses, the internationally recognized designation for a hospital ship. Both sides of the war had hospital ships under these markings, and both sides of the war agreed to care for whatever wounded they could. Therefore, it was understood that neither side should attack a hospital ship of any nationality.
Prior to Britannic's voyage, the German submarine U-73 had laid 2 mine barriers in the Kea Channel, totaling approximately 12 mines. Now, mines are indiscriminate killers. The mine was not meant to target a hospital ship like Britannic, but rather it was laid where the Germans thought that they would interdict British naval traffic going into or out of Greek ports.
The Britannic is about to hit him.
My name is Corporal Jack Waugh, of the Royal Army Medical Corps. I had just finished breakfast and had come up on deck. I sat down on the hatchway while one of our chaplains with his map out was showing us different places of interest on the nearby shorelines.
When Brittanic hit one of the contact fuses on the mine detonated. The resulting explosion created an expanding gas bubble, lifting Britannic's bow with it. It twisted Britannic's hull a bit, slightly warped her frame, which resulted in the watertight doors in boiler rooms 6 and 5 becoming jammed in their tracks in the full open position.
At breakfast, a muffled explosion rang out from the lower decks. The ship vibrated more than it shook. The vibrations passed us, smashing the furniture and windows, then echoed off into the distance. Moments later, the vibrations echoed back, smashing more glass and crockery around us. These vibrations reverberated from one end of the ship to the other for over a full minute. Nurse Ada Garland, Voluntary Aid Detachment.
I had just had my bath and was now shaving in my cabin, which was about 10 yards distant from the point of contact. I was thrown very forcibly across the cabin, with sundry articles of gear on top of me. The boat lifted twice, and everything seemed to dance. And the fumes from the explosion temporarily blinded me. 5th Officer Gordon Fielding.
Some were killed by the explosion itself. In the steward's quarters, the bunks fell down on top of the men, and everything collapsed, while I believe the emergency staircase was blown away. The water ran in great volumes to the forward compartments. The fumes in the alleyways were something stifling. Not sulphurous, but something poisonous and unearthly. Assistant Chief Engineer, Joseph Wolfe.
Yeah, great. Oh, look at my fish. Okay. The Britannic is taking on water now.
My first impression was that we had hit a mine and we would probably be safe. I gave orders to clear the lifeboats and have them made ready to be sent away should it necessitate. Captain Charles Bartlett, HMHS Britannic, 21st of November 1960.
Captain Charles Bartlett came onto the bridge still wearing his pajamas. His first orders were to sound the emergency quarters alarm and to close the watertight doors.
I have a drawing of Britannic I did like 3 years ago.
He wasn't aware at that point that the forward doors were jammed in the open position. He ordered the engines to stop and the lifeboats to be swung out and readied for lowering. At the same time, he gave the order to the wireless telegraph operators to send out an SOS call for distress.
I ordered the sending out of the SOS signal by wireless, but we were not receiving any replies whatsoever. We were for a while under the impression that the apparatus was down altogether, but they continued sending the messages out regardless of response.
What the wireless operator didn't know is that the explosion had caused Britannic's hull to flex a bit, whipping the foremast and breaking some of the connections between the wireless aerial strung between the masts and the transmitter in the ship's silent room. What this meant was that Britannic could still send out an SOS message, but she could not receive any replies.
I was on the bridge waiting for orders. My heart was in my mouth, but when I saw the captain standing there, cool and quiet, I thought to myself, it's all right, and felt a deal more comfortable. And I went to the locker and got out the captain's megaphone according to orders, and I stood alongside the captain on the bridge to see if he had any orders for me. The ship seemed to be leaning a bit to the starboard side, and she still seemed to be going ahead a little. Second Fremantle Scout Troop Patrol Leader, James Vickers.
I permitted my staff to return to their cabins, so long as it was done with haste. We're all too familiar with the dangers of ship sinking. The Lusitania was only a year ago, and the Titanic only 3 years ago. Nurse matron of the HMHS Britannic, Miss Elizabeth Ann Dowes.
You could clearly see because of all the red.
As we were walking out of the saloon, the signal went and blast rang out from the siren. Not until then would I believe that there was any danger. I distinctly remember as we quietly walked down the beautiful marble staircase and along the long corridor, where the sun streamed in the portholes, lighting up all our lovely cabins. This was goodbye to everything. Our ship was sinking. How fast? We didn't know. Nurse Ada Garland, Voluntary Aid Detachment.
Oh yeah, did you see the propeller?
As the situation continues to deteriorate, the captain realizes that his ship is in serious trouble. The Greek island of Kea looms only a couple of miles in the distance. Captain Bartlett orders a turn toward it in an effort to beach the ship. If Britannic can be beached, a dangerous evacuation could be avoided and the ship could possibly be salvaged.
Oh, definitely. Look at the bow. I thought the ship was going to sink like Titanic. It actually did almost sink like the Titanic because the bow was actually in the air at one point. People thought the ship capsized. It did kind of capsize because it went down risky to starboard at the same time.
The crew immediately began to uncover and swing out the boats. Britannic's 55 lifeboats were arranged on her deck and numbered much differently than on Titanic. On the forward starboard side were boats 1A through 1C, consisting of large 34-foot rowboats. Amidships in single acting davits were 12 30-foot boats, as well as 12 collapsible boats similar to those found on Titanic. These were numbered 2 through 13 and 2A through 13A respectively. The middle set of gantry davits held 12 more 34-foot boats, numbered 14A through 14F and 15A through 15F. The aft-braced gantry davits held 10 34-foot boats and 2 34-foot Thornycraft motorised boats. These were numbered 16A through 16F and 17A through 17F. Aft on the shade deck, where originally 2 more gantry davits were designed to be installed, here Wayland davits held 2 30-foot boats and 2 collapsibles numbered 18, 18A, 19 and 19A. At the end of the sinking, of the 55 boats on board, only 35 boats would be launched.
The first boat to leave the Britannic left at around 8:20 a.m. A group of frightened firemen swung the boat out and climbed aboard themselves, lowering the boat with only a handful on board, despite its capacity of around 65. However, Assistant Commander to the Britannic, Captain Dyke, ordered the boat to rescue people as they jumped overboard, so these seats were not entirely wasted.
Immediately, I swung out 2 boats, which were promptly rushed by the stewards, followed by my working crew of about a dozen sailors. As this was only a sudden panic, I was able to persuade them to get back to their positions. I must say that my sailors were wonderful after this first panic, and not one offered to leave the ship before receiving his orders. 5th Officer Gordon Fielding.
After a certain interval, the steering gear having apparently failed, I turned the ship to head for land under her own steam. I tried compensating for our jammed rudder by running the engines on one side of the ship, hardly the other.
The ship begins to lose control as the helmsman reports steering failure. For one reason or another, the steering gear no longer responds. The captain tries to use the propellers to steer the ship, using higher power on the port side that would turn the ship slowly to starboard, towards Kia.
I snatched up my coat, bag and life belt and commenced along the long corridor to the wards to see if help was needed with patients. It was a terrible sight. Men who could barely walk struggling to climb the stairs. The screams and shouts could be heard all over the ship as the badly injured were being moved. We all helped until the very last minute when we heard the cry of our dear brave matron saying, "Hurry up, my dear children." Nurse Ada Garland.
You can't see the lift to starboard. But fact of it is that Titanic sank faster than Titanic because Titanic.
I broke off from the group and entered my cabin. I indulged in a few bites as I pocketed my possessions. I ring my friend.
The facts have it that Britannic sank faster than Titanic is because Titanic could get a transmitter, and close all their watertight doors, but Britannic couldn't use They could use a transmitter. They could send out distress calls, but they couldn't get replies. And I think 2 of the watertight doors were just jammed, so Britannic sank in 55 minutes and Titanic sank in 2 hours and 40 minutes.
Given me, and my clock, of course. This clock was the most precious gift a friend had given me. Then there was my prayer book and my toothbrush. The latter was because I complained about not being able to acquire a toothbrush while on board the Carpathia after the sinking of the Titanic. I was now experienced with surviving shipwrecks. One might even call me an expert. I was advising people that they should wear their coats over their life jackets, and not the other way around. Should they find themselves in the water, they will need to drop off their coats, which becomes harder when the lifebelt is over it. Despite my frequent advice, I found myself having accidentally done the opposite.
Most of us put on our coats and all took our life jackets and started for the boat deck. When partway up the emergency exit, an officer hailed us with, "You better hurry up, ladies." Then we knew there was more cause to hurry than we thought, and as soon as we got on top, we realised that something dreadful had happened.
A lifeboat's been lowered.
Panic was beginning to spread among the people idling on the decks. Fresh in their minds were the sinkings of Titanic and Lusitania. Within only the first few minutes of the explosion, the ship took on a noticeable slant downward toward the bow and a list to starboard. This only increased the panic. Instead of waiting for orders, a handful of lifeboats were launched without authorization from the overseeing officer. Some of the boats cleared the sinking ship, but not all.
The ship had taken on a heavy list to starboard. Then she began to dip heavily forward. The RAMC were paraded on deck, and I am proud to say that anyone would have taken it for an ordinary, everyday parade. Everyone was as calm and as collected as it was possible to be. I never thought for a moment that she would go down as sharp as she did. Corporal Jack Waugh, Royal Army Medical Corps.
I'm not thinking quick. Way quicker than Titanic.
The first ship to receive Britannic's distress calls was the destroyer HMS Scourge. The Naval Auxiliary HMS Heroic also received Britannic's distress call. They responded to it, saying that they were steaming to the rescue, but Britannic's wireless operator never received the message.
And as we were being lowered, we were almost thrown out of the boat catching the side. However, we eventually reached the water. The propellers were now on water level, and several of the boats were drawn into the whirlpool. The boat I was in, the pulleys taken directly off, was drawn right to the propellers. And then came the decisive moment of my life. I could not swim. Yet as I looked and saw men being cut up by those terrible blades, I made a quick decision. My chum could swim, so he dived over the side. I looked after him. We were now almost to the blades, so I jumped into the sea as well. The blades were beating the boats down, and the wreckage was keeping me under, and I could not rise, try as I would. How long this went on, I don't know, but to me it was terribly long. And I had ceased to struggle, never expecting to come out alive, as I was almost gone. I remember my thoughts then were these. This is the end. What a death. I saw my dear wife and dear little children as plainly as if they were standing before me. Then, as if by magic, I caught a breath of fresh air. Corporal Jack Waugh, Royal Army Medical Corps.
My name is Henry Pip. I'm a 15-year-old Sea Scout. There wasn't any excitement, as everyone knew their boat stations and went to them without stopping to look for their kits. The Sea Scouts on the lifts worked them for as long as they could, but the ship soon listed so much to starboard that they had to give up and go up to the boats.
I lowered 2 of them down to about 6 feet above the waterline. In spite of the curses of the men in the boats, I kept them there until definite orders from the bridge to launch the boats. 5th Officer Gordon Fielding.
We didn't have much success getting away from the ship's side. The Britannic was still pushing forward under her own steam.
Watch that, watch that, watch that lifeboat be crushed.
Suddenly, all the men began leaping into the sea. No shouts, just splashes as they leapt for it. Within moments, I found myself to be the only occupant of these lifeboats. But it didn't take me long to find out the reason. Britannic's huge propellers were churning and mincing up everything near them. Men, boats, and everything were just one ghastly whirl. I turned to leap into the sea, but I hesitated. I forced myself into the water, but was unable to swim. Then hit on the head repeatedly by something solid. I believe it was either a piece of boat or the propeller itself. It hit me 3 times on the head. Terrible blows that made my brain rattle. But fortunately, it hit me where my hair was thickest. An arm grabbed me and pulled me to the surface. It gripped me and moved as mine did. I grabbed it back as I surfaced, but to my horror found it was merely a severed arm and part of a torso. As the great white liner steamed away from me, I saw to my horror a severed head to my left, floating, despite having been cracked open like a sheep's head severed by a butcher. Wreckage of every sort was everywhere as the ship slowly ploughed into the distance.
The men in my boats, still hanging in the falls 6 feet above the water, witnessed this disaster, and I must say that they ceased cursing at me about not being released at this point.
Fielding again.
I saw the boat with its poor, pathetic crew get dragged into the churning propellers. I suppose I was taken to the core, but I could not show this. If I dared to reveal fear, it would spread like a bushfire on the veldt. I sat there, emotionless. For what emotion could I have expressed if not fear or sorrow? Nurse matron Miss Elizabeth Ann Dowse.
Water began flooding the forward holds rapidly, and water was reported.
They've stopped the propellers.
So I stopped the engines and ordered all the boats possible to be sent away, or to stand by close to the ship.
Two lifeboats were smashed to splinters by the propeller blades, but the blades stopped briefly just before a third boat came into their death grip. 3 men stayed in the boat and pushed against the blades to move the boat away. Lieutenant Colonel Henry Stuart Anderson, Royal Army Medical Corps.
That's cool. If the people knew that the captain was going, if the people knew the captain was going to make try and turn the ship to port, the starboard, to get to the key island, people would have known, get onto the lifeboats on the starboard side of the ship because the starboard propeller wasn't going. Put a minute forward. Now equal 29. The ship's death is in clear sight. Because propellers are visible.
Britannic glided to a stop, with the propellers lifting up out of the water as the bow sank deeper into the sea. The forward port lifeboat davit, a standard Welland davit, became inoperable due to an increasing starboard list. 3 boats are launched in quick succession from the aft port gantry davit, which could accommodate more of a list than the standard Welling davits.
You can see that lift to starboard too. If it goes to the bow, oh my god, look how close the bow is to the water. "20 minutes left.
With the forward lifeboat gantries out of commission, I moved aft and successfully launched another fully loaded boat. I then hooked on the 5-ton motor launch when the first officer came up saying he had orders from the captain to leave in this boat and to take charge and pick up any survivors from the smashed boats. As the officer had nearly been drowned in the wreck of the Arabic, he was somewhat excited and urgent.
The second alarm was sounded and Captain Bartlett told me to go and get into my boat. I walked along the boat deck to my boat and the first officer told me to get into the motor launch, which was soon being lowered. I got in and in doing so my foot got jammed between the side of the ship and the motor launch.
I filled the motor launch with 30 Royal Army medics.
I recognise that voice. That voice is Spammers.
My boat was lowered to the water. 4 oars and 4 men to each oar. We pulled for our lives to clear the suction. While pulling away, something hit me on my left eye. I did not take much notice at the time. Blood began running down my face. After we got clear of the danger of the ship, we started to rescue our comrades that was in the water. We had no one to man our boats, so we carried on ourselves. We had pulled one out of the water and given him treatment. We saw another that was nearly dead, so we pulled towards him. On reaching him, we tried to pull him into our boat, but we failed as our boat had so many people in it. It overturned, and we were in distress. Private Samuel Edwin Williams, Royal Army Medical Corps.
Because of the heat of a buttoned-up steamship in the Mediterranean, even in November, the medical staff against all operating procedures in the war zone. opened the forward portholes to allow ventilation, to get some fresh air to circulate throughout the ship before the wounded were brought on board. But this meant as the water reached the portholes of E-deck, those portholes now gave the water multiple entries into the hull. The flooding of the ship now intensifies.
Lift to starboard if clear. Oh, this is starboard. Forty minutes in. The thinking is.
rounded up another boat with 75 men, mostly RAMCs. As the Britannic was now very badly listing to starboard and we were on the high side, we had much difficulty in getting this boat away. She nearly capsized a few times before she cleared the ship. It was now impossible to launch any more boats from the port side.
The ship seemed to stop settling a little. She gave me hope that she had stabilized herself. I passed word to stop lowering the boats as we again attempted to work the ship towards land.
At this point, I had about 6 sailors and 30 RAMCs who were sat in the next boat calmly waiting for me to put them into the water. They didn't realize it was now impossible. Well, with this crowd, I went to Britannic's midship island, and we threw overboard to starboard all the collapsible rafts and deck chairs and anything else that we could find. This was the first time I had thought I might actually have a chance of saving my own life. A little bit of hope that I felt. I can't explain it.
When the starboard list reached 10 degrees, launching of port boats from even the gantry davits was no longer possible. Crews on that side gave up trying to lower boats and began throwing deck chairs and life rafts into the water below. And despite the growing list, it seemed to the crew on board that the rate at which Britannic was sinking had slowed. So Captain Bartlett ordered the lifeboat launcher to be paused, and the engine started again in an attempt to reach Kea Island.
The ship's got 10 more minutes above water.
I saw the sixth officer struggling to get his boat into the water at one of the lower points on the ship. I got some rather nasty rope burn as we tried maneuvering this boat by the ropes. We almost lifted this boat over the side. I put in all my remaining men with the sixth officer and kept 2 or 3 with me to manage the control breaks during the launching. Once the boat was in the water, the 2 men and I slithered ourselves down the rope and into the lifeboat.
About to sink in 4 minutes. Want my biscuits. I don't know why I'm talking about biscuits.
The forward motion of the ship only dug the bow deeper underwater. Water was reported to be flooding the vessel at a record rate, so the captain ordered Britannic to stop for one final time.
Ship signal to a long blast of the whistle.
She seemed just like a pitiful, dumb animal tortured, her sirens blasting for help up to the very last.
Captain C.A. Bartlett, the commander of the Britannic, stayed on the bridge giving orders to the officers through his speaking megaphone as the ship was going down under his feet. He not leave until the water lapped over him.
The ship was sinking very quickly then, going distant to sky, and soon we came on the bridge. Assistant Commander Dyke having reported to me that we left the ship, I told him to leave, and shortly after I followed him. We barely left the bridge, walking into the water by the boat gantry on the starboard side. The funnels fell just below us.
One of the quartermasters had gone below early in the sinking to find supplies of bread from the ship's pantries to stock the lifeboats. He came out onto the deck to find the bridge submerged and the ship rapidly dropping in the water. He dropped the bread and leapt into the sea with mere seconds to spare before the vessel had disappeared.
When we reached the deck, the foremost of the 4 funnels was touching the water, and the bows were completely submerged. We jumped 80 feet into the sea from the second-class quarters on sea deck, and after swimming clear, we watched the awesome sight of the mighty liner sinking. Assistant Chief Engineer, Joseph Wolfe.
It was indeed sad to watch our ship, slowly but surely sinking. We could hear her boilers rumbling off like thunder into the water, and her immense funnels, through which one could have driven a coach and 4, were ripped up with as little difficulty as tearing a piece of paper.
That little lifeboat and the cord lifted into view. But oh my god, it's sinking! So I'm a lifeboat.
As she sank in only 480 feet of water, and the ship sank almost vertical and was 890 feet long, she touched the bottom.
watched her founder. To have been able to...
Now, hope you guys enjoyed that video. Big thank you to Titanic Honor and Glory for letting me use the 2 videos, and bye.